Chapter 1. I don't suppose a name could be invented that would suit Papa better than Bigham, the name he had inherited from his grandparents who had emigrated from Ireland in 1838. Big he was, in every way, big-boned, big-jawed, 6'2", and always a little on the side of portly. Because he was prematurely gray and had a noble set to his head, I thought he looked like President George Washington, whose picture hung in the first-grade room at Little Brighton School. As to the last half of the name, I don't know if President George Washington was a ham or not, but I know that Papa was. Life was a performance. He loved to engage in informal conversation or sing impromptu songs, most of which had a Scotch-Irish flavor. On many a sunny morning in Seattle, you could hear him chirping with the birds. Oh, 'tis nice to get up in the mornin', when the sun begins to shine, at 5 or 6 or 7 o'clock, in the good old summertime. But when the snow is snowin' and it's murky overhead. Oh, 'tis nice to get up in the mornin', but it's nicer to lie in bed. Of course, we 3 little Bighams, or small potatoes, as Papa sometimes called us, abhorred our name and complained about having to deal with tormentors who delighted in pronouncing it the way it was spelled. Mama consoled us. When you get big, you can change your names. Hopefully we could find something better than Bigham. After a trip to Wisconsin where we learned that some members of the family had changed the name to Bigham, we reproached Papa. Why couldn't we change our name? His comeback was that Bigham had graced the tombstones of Putnam County, New York, and Arcadia Township in Wisconsin, and that it would grace his tombstone wherever that might be. And there was no telling where that might be, because Papa was somewhat of a vagabond. After graduating from the University of Wisconsin in 1901, he had spent the next dozen years practicing law in 5 states and 1 territory, namely Wisconsin, Minnesota, California, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. Papa always said that he had originally intended to practice law in the remaining 48, except that one day he met the typewriting gal of San Mateo. I walked into the office and there she sat like a cat waiting to catch a mouse. Mama contradicted. I saw the name on his card and said, "No thank you, I don't like ham." But when she found out I had enough money to buy her a diamond, he kept flashing it in my face. Mama twisted the ring that she always wore on her finger. Of course I didn't tell her that I had to hawk my matching pen and pencil set for the first installment. Mama usually ended that conversation by saying, "And just to think I had a perfectly good name, Tenny Talbert." Although Papa had never seen the Emerald Isle, he had heard stories of how his grandfather, James Bigham, born in North Ireland of Scotch parentage, had come with his wife, Catherine McVoy Bigham, to America. After 18 years in Putnam County, New York, Catherine McVoy died, and James Bigham came west to hack out a farm from the Wisconsin wilderness. He remarried and had 13 more children. For years, I thought that Papa had composed the lovely song, "I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen," expressly for his grandmother. Not that Papa claimed it. He just naturally intermingled others' songs with his own. Sometimes Papa's songs were spontaneous. At other times, however, like any great poet, Papa had trouble rhyming, and we would have to suffer while he verbally worked it out. One memorable effort, I had to buy a rattle for our baby in Seattle, 'cause Mama wouldn't let me buy the booze. Actually, it was not Mama's nature to nag and complain, or tell Papa what he could and couldn't buy. Oh, she'd argue back and state her case, but in the long run, she'd leave the decisions and responsibilities up to Papa. She understood the man she'd married, and as her horse-breeding relatives from Indiana would say, "You've got to give a wild horse the reins and let him run." On the other hand, there was the matter of the kitchen stove. When we moved into the house called Temporary, the old gas range was in the same condition as the furnace. Papa offered to buy Mama a stove like his mother used in Wisconsin. Nothing baked as good as wood. Mama let him talk himself out and then said, "Roy, if you want to be nostalgic, why don't you buy yourself a cow, but I want an electric range." An electric range? Papa was horrified. Who's going to burn up all this wood we have in the Northwest? Mama allowed her shoulders to sag as if they weren't large enough to carry another ounce of responsibility, regardless of the Northwest economy. Electricity is so much cleaner. No ashes, no bad smell. This exchange went on until Papa began suffering from what he called severe weight loss due to undercooked oatmeal mush, and then one day Mama got her electric range. We all gathered around to admire. It was black and silver and shiny. It stood on 4 legs like a table. On the right side were 3 burners, and on the left were 2 ovens, one stacked on top of the other. The nice salesman pointed out, "You don't have to stoop over. It'll save your back. He gave her a beautiful new cookbook, especially adapted for electric ranges. Mama was in heaven. When it came time to replace the furnace, though, it was a different matter, and how we came to wish that Mama had exerted her influence just one more time. Thinking back, however, I'm convinced her appeal would have been doomed anyway. Papa firmly believed in the big black book, and now that there was a big red check there from having bought Mama's kitchen stove, that sin had to be atoned for before he could incur any more red checks. The farthest Mama ventured into the decision was, please don't get one at a fire sale, and please don't try to put it in yourself. These were sore subjects around our house. Papa had been studying pamphlets and talking to friends and neighbors all summer long. His decisions were seldom based on what would make life more pleasant. Instead, they were based on what could best build our character, and if he could help the Northwest economy to boot, so much the better. It seemed there were several different options. Our special friend, a well-to-do doctor who lived in the Mount Baker district, had installed an oil burner in his home, and he extolled its virtues. When you get up in the morning, all you have to do is flick a switch, and before you get your teeth brushed, you've got warm feet. Papa wasn't having problems with his feet, cold or otherwise, and as always was suspicious of anything that took too little effort. I don't suppose Papa would ever have admitted that making things difficult was his goal in life, but the fact is that Papa dug into everything too deeply. Maybe it was a natural instinct that had steered him into investigative work, his lifetime occupation, or maybe it was acquired from walking 10 miles to school through Wisconsin snowbanks, after spending the early morning hours in the milk parlor, an activity he described as having his head bucked up against the belly of a shorthorn cow. Papa had 29 arguments against oil, including the earth running dry and ships exploding at sea. He told Mama, "Let Californians have the oil burners. We in the Northwest should use our timber products." Mama considered herself a Californian and could speak with authority. "I don't think the Californians want oil burners." Papa said, "If they aren't sold on their own natural resources, why should we?" Mama said, "I mean, in California, they don't need..." Papa said, "I know what you mean." He didn't have time to argue. He had let the matter of the furnace go too long, and now he had to make a decision. He went to the niche in the hall where we kept the phone and dialed. "You can start putting the furnace in as soon as possible." For several days, the furnace man worked in the basement wrestling pipes and pounding on the floor joists. Mama objected that all the noise was making her cakes fall. "That man sure likes noise," she said. Papa said, "I'm not sure he likes noise. I'm not even sure he hears any of it. Fact is, I think he is hard of hearing. And as for speaking, he's hard of that too." Mama agreed. "I haven't heard a word out of him." We all agreed. He was the most talkless man we had ever heard. Or not heard, that is. Flora attributed his lack of communication to the big black cigar in his mouth. Just because Papa wasn't banging on pipes didn't mean that he wasn't involved. He was busy digging out the area under the front porch, pushing the wheelbarrow back and forth through the basement, dumping the dirt out by the madrona trees. Flora and I hung around waiting for Papa's return trip so that we could hitch a ride in the wheelbarrow. After a few loads, he'd stop and talk shop with the furnace man and point to his tools, which were arranged in logical order over his workbench. "Feel free to use whatever..." I wondered why he was being so free-spirited with a stranger when he was so tight-fisted with us. The understanding around our house was that nobody was to use Papa's tools except Papa. He had anticipated problems here and had bought Mama an everyday set: screwdriver, pliers, a hammer, etc., with instructions that if we needed tools, and why should little girls need tools, pray tell, we were supposed to use these. The problem was that Mama's tools got bent or blunted or misplaced, so if one was on a particularly urgent job, one's head began to spin with visions of Papa's spit and polished assortment. As we all found out, this was not a good way to use one's head. The most fearful sound to ever come from our basement was, "Who's been using my tools?" That was before we began hearing explosions from the sawdust burner. "Yes, sir, sawdust puts out a nice even heat," Papa said to the furnace man. Mr. Bang, as Fleur had begun to call him, took a puff on his big black cigar and made no comment. "May not be quite as convenient as oil, but I'm sure it's a lot more reliable. My friend Doc's got oil, but then he doesn't have any kids to help fill the hopper. Besides, he needs the convenience. What, with women folk always callin' in the middle of the night to come and deliver their babies?" With that, Papa put on his gloves to go back to the digging area. "Do you know I delivered my own baby right in this house?" Apparently Mr. Bang didn't know. At least he made no comment. "Yap," Papa said. I had just been transferred from Spokane, in the middle of winter, mind you. Couldn't find any place in the whole damn Puget Sound area. You remember how hard it was to get housing. Had to stay in a fleabag hotel down near the Smith Tower. Tight quarters for me and the wife and kids. And there was that damn flu epidemic, and we had to wear flug masks. Remember? Mr. Bang had laid his cigar down on Papa's workbench and was digging in his toolbox. He said nothing. Here I was juggling house hunting with setting up my new office. Finally ran into this place. You should have heard the wife when she saw it. It's so dilapidated, Roy. But if you thought that was bad, you should have seen her when I broke the news that we'd have to buy it. She really had a fit. But you know how pregnant women are? Inclined to having fits? Mr. Bang was now banging away on a piece of metal, so Papa took up his wheelbarrow. On his next trip through, there was not so much banging, so Papa continued. Well, Tenny, that's my wife, hit a real low ebb. I tried to console her by telling her the place has good floor joists. It does, you know. Well, of course you know. You've been banging on 'em for 2 days now. Papa laughed. Good floor joists are of special interest to women, you know. Especially pregnant women, so she consented to move in. Papa had figured surely that would bring a response, but Mr. Bang just took another puff on his cigar. But I had to promise that the move would only be temporary, and that I could fix the house up. I spent the first summer painting it. It was brown, and Tenny said it was so dark that she... Just then, Mama came down with a tray loaded with coffee things, and a cake that she had just baked. It obviously had not fallen. It was piled high with white frosting and coconut. My new electric range makes the most beautiful cakes, she said. She cut a huge piece and handed it to Mr. Bang. I love these modern conveniences. Mr. Bang took the cigar out of his mouth and smiled. I can't tell you if it was because of the cake, because of Mama, or because of the words modern conveniences, but there was actually a perceptive change in his face. Mama said, I'm looking forward to having a nice new modern furnace. Mr. Bang stopped smiling. Mama had apparently run out of things to say, so she left. And Papa continued, she wanted the house painted like they paint houses in California. She's from California, you know, by way of Indiana and Georgia. Well, painting a dark brown shingle house white took more white paint than the whole Smith Tower. Mr. Bang seemed ready to say something, but Papa continued. I know, they don't paint the Smith Tower being as how it's white tile. Did I tell you? That was the only thing that Mama liked about Seattle. The Smith Tower. We came to town about the time they were dedicating it, and I always told her and the kids that they built it to celebrate our arrival. I think the kids still believe that. It's the tallest building west of the Mississippi, you know, 42 stories. Did I tell you that I was raised near the Mississippi, in Wisconsin, and that... Mr. Bang looked at Papa, shifted his cigar, and blew out a big cloud of smoke. Papa coughed and said, Another thing about sawdust, it doesn't have that awful smell. It'll be good exercise filling the hopper. I won't have to join the athletic club. Papa wiped the perspiration from his neck and from inside his shirt around his chest and armpits. By this time, Mr. Bang had his head shoved up into a hole in the ceiling. Papa went off with his wheelbarrow again. Eventually, Mr. Bang finished his job and left. Papa's work, however, went on for weeks. He had to jack up the porch, put in new footings and new foundations, and let it down again. Mama said she was worried that the whole house would topple down the hill. Papa said, that would give new meaning to the word temporary. One autumn afternoon, a huge truck dumped a mountain of sawdust in our driveway. It came up almost to the eaves. We begged to play in it. Papa was feeling expansive, drinking from his blue stein and eating Limburger cheese. We were off and running, through the living room, up the stairs, down the hall, across the bedroom, to the window, and onto the roof where we jumped down into the pile. It wasn't long before Mama appeared with her broom and dustpan in hand. Roy, do you know what these girls are doing? Yep. Kids have to have some fun. But Roy, I know you think it's too dangerous. No, I don't think that. I think someone has got to clean up this long trail of sawdust, and I don't think that it's going to be you. That's one of the advantages of having a new modern convenience. After Mama had swept down the stairs, Papa loaded up the sawdust hopper and lit a match. The expected didn't happen, which was all right, because it was a warm Indian summer, and we didn't need the heat. Papa tinkered all day, explaining that new things always needed adjusting. Adjusting. That became an important word in Papa's vocabulary. No matter how much adjusting he did, then and in the years to come, the dang thing never worked properly. Either the sawdust was too wet, too dry, too coarse, or too fine. And if by some miracle the sawdust was just right, the wind was blowing the wrong direction down the chimney. And then there were the ants. Hundreds of millions of them. And they didn't just stay in the sawdust, or the sawdust bin, or in the basement even. They marched right upstairs into our oatmeal mush. Killing ants became an obsession. For years when our friends called to inquire, "What you doin'?" our stock answer was, "We're killing ants." For several years, Papa was the chief engineer of the sawdust operation. With one big scoop of the sawdust fork, he'd fill the buckets, and Flora and I would haul them across the basement and up onto a big stool where we emptied them into the hopper. As far as I know, Papa benefited from the exercise and, even better, felt that he was balancing the big black book for having bought Mama's frivolous electric stove. Unfortunately, Papa's dues got paid up at the same time that Flora and I grew bigger. Papa washed his hands of the whole deal, and tending the furnace became a good chore for the kids. It was our first great lesson in the work arena. Rewards are not always commensurate with the effort put forth. It seemed our whole lives were involved in shoveling sawdust. All summer long we worked getting it into the bin, and all winter long getting it from the bin into the hopper. Eventually, Flora and I began using the argument that women of that day used when trying to keep their daughters from climbing fences, carrying heavy loads, or sitting around the beach in wet cotton bathing suits. "Papa, I'm getting female problems." Papa didn't quite buy that argument, but then what did he, a mere male, know? What hurt the most was that Papa would never admit that he had made a poor decision. When we groused about all the work, he always had one argument to fall back on. It's important to help the Northwest economy. Who could argue with that?